Morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this month. This is one that we did last year as well. Essentially, it's going to be a lot of the same stuff, but we're going to get a little bit deeper into what the software can do. If you're not familiar with Energy AI, it uses smart meter data, then does a weather analysis of the data to point out usage patterns. That's my summary of it. I'm going to let Dave kind of take control. Stand by as we do this, and we'll be rolling here shortly.
Well, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity, and thank all of you for signing on. What I'm going to do is give you a quick tour of Energy AI. Start off with what I call the our birth story, so to speak, where the inspiration from Energy AI came from. I've been involved with energy analysis startups since the mid-'80s. And John Avina, the head of Abraxas, is one of our early employees. Metrics started its life as one of the tools of those startups. So we've been doing energy analysis and M&V and programs like that for software tools for utilities, large energy users, government, private, et cetera, for a long time. And I'd say it was about 12, 13 years ago, we were doing a large installation of enterprise software system for IBM, tying in, actually, what am I saying? It was close to 20 years ago now, tying in, installing sub-meters and tying in stuff for their facilities worldwide with the lofty goal of being able to see everything on screen for any of your facilities. And we went to the initial training session, which was in Chicago for facility managers in the U.S. And we said, let's call up this facility that we're sitting in, one of their Chicago offices. We said, let's look at the recent week of data. I think they had hourly data we were able to collect at that time. We had on screen in this auditorium, the most recent week of data, and we thought, geez, isn't this great? You can see rising and falling and whatnot. And from the back of the room, one of their folks, who in fact was an IT person, not even a facility manager or an energy person, said, hey, something's wrong. We looked at the data, so what do you mean? And this person said, we're closed on the weekends, this facility. Why is that happening? And she was pointing to Sunday and a bump that was happening in Sunday. And there went our training session. Everybody immediately dived into trying to figure out, okay, what was going on Sunday? And it was inspiration in that even a non-energy expert knows their facility and they know how the facility should operate. And Energy AI came out of that in the sense that what we are trying to do is learn as much as possible about a facility's operation using only interval energy data. Now, as Tyler said, we combine that with local weather. We also combine it with publicly available pricing information. But what we're trying to show people is how their facility operates from the meter's perspective, and doing that as easily and as cheaply as possible. So we're trying to provide the information in very actionable formats. We're also trying to tailor it as much as possible for a non-technical audience. So a lot of the stuff we're going to look at now, you'll see, is presenting dollars and cents as opposed to kilowatt hours and kW or whatever. We've also automated the analysis so that the price point is low. The other big objective with Energy AI is to make our service affordable for even small energy users, or if you have like let's say you have a customer like a university campus or something with many facilities, and you can't afford to instrument everything, but you want to be able to at least look at even the smaller facilities and see if any savings opportunities there or if they're operating as expected. So keeping the price low was one of our founding goals. Energy AI is not really software. It's not a software tool in the sense we don't sell software. We're selling a service. In fact, I like to joke we're selling a report. We do have a standard report that we're going to use as our guide for this webinar. $20 report, you can order it online, and typically you get it within an hour after you order it. Our clients, about 65% of our clients are energy services professionals who use the service as part of their toolkit. So what we're looking at right now is the cover page of the report, which we're going to go through. The report for our energy service clients is usually rebranded. So where you see the Energy AI logo on the top, you would see your logo, for example. 35%, the other 35% are facility managers, owners, the end users who will get the reports for their own facilities. Most of our energy service clients, they will use Energy AI as a pre-audit tool, something very early with their customer engagement, to show the customer again, how does the facility operate from the meter's perspective. And often, more often than not, they'll see something that surprises their client, perhaps like the IBM example. Gee, why are we seeing so much energy usage on periods when we're closed? Why is my usage waking up so early in the morning? Why is it waking up at 4 a.m. when we don't start operations till 8 a.m.? Questions like that. What Energy AI is not, and I like to stress this particularly for this type of audience, Energy AI is not a virtual audit. It is not a substitute for an audit, on-site audit. We are only looking at using interval energy data for the analysis we don't know anything about, type of operations, operating schedules, type of heating, cooling equipment, or whatever. It knows nothing about the facility other than its detailed energy use. So it is not a virtual audit. It's not an M&V analysis, while the methodology that we'll discuss now does use a lot of M&V methodology. We basically loosen some of the thresholds, because what we're trying to show people is, here's our best guess as to how the facility operates. This is not something you would use, again, like metrics, for example. This is not a replacement for metrics. It's something to start the discussion, show where there may be potential savings, and again, how the facility operates. All right, with that as a too long introduction, I'm going to jump into the report. What I like to do is just go through the report. This is our standard report. Many of our clients will get customized versions if they're, have certain specific areas they focus on. We have some clients who focus on steam systems, for example. But what I'm showing you is the $20 Blue Plate Special, which again, order online at energyai-ws.com. We'll show you all that at the end. Typically takes 5 minutes to order a report. So what we're looking at here, I'm going to zoom out to show you a full page. This is the first page of a report, and the report has been carefully designed with a lot of feedback over the years from our clients. It's designed in a way like an old-fashioned print newspaper, where the front page shows you the most important stories of the day. It shows you the conclusions, basically. I'm going to zoom back in. And the following sections of the report then flesh out each of these stories, each of these headlines on the front page. So the front page here, this is an actual facility we did a recent analysis on. We've changed the name. It's a manufacturing facility in the Northeast US. And what you see is a very simple graph showing weekly energy use broken up into the components that Energy AI analyzes. And we'll go into each of these in a bit more detail, but essentially they are at the bottom, and the dark blue is what we call the 24/7, which is the equipment which is always running 24/7. Normal equipment, which is cycling on and off, lights, computers, whatever process load they may have. Heating, this particular facility, at least the electricity is not correlate with heating, so there's no heating in this example. Seasonal are other long-term, cooling, sorry, skip cooling. This one is sensitive to cooling, correlates to cooling. Seasonal tend to be, those of you who are metrics users will know that in addition to weather, you can enter other drivers, such as perhaps occupancy for a hotel or production for a manufacturing facility, other independent variables. Now, Energy AI, we don't ask for any of that. Again, we know nothing about the operations. So we use some statistical methods borrowed from forecasting to look at long-term trends, which in all likelihood, in fact, are independent variables, such as production, which we categorize as seasonal. And then we look for the unusually high stuff, these bright red specks, which are usage above the baseline, significantly above the baseline. And we look for patterns in those. Do they tend to occur when? In the middle of the night? Do they tend to occur in the afternoon, summer, winter? So again, this is the top level stuff, and we try to identify the potential savings opportunities. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we really stress the cost estimates, again, for a less technical audience. So we're saying here, we think there's about $13,000 potential savings from reducing 24/7 load. We think there's about $12,500 from reducing operating hours. And we'll get into each one of these in a bit more detail to show you the assumptions. And there's a lot of assumptions that go into this. I like to steal a line from one of my clients who says, Energy AI can show you the smoking gun, but it can't tell you who pulled the trigger. So that's why I say it's not a substitute for a true on-site audit, for example. Energy AI can show you that, gee, we've got a lot of unusually high use in the summertime on weekends, for example. But it can't exactly pinpoint, oh, it's because this chiller is failing, or the controls are wrong, or, you know, that's your job. So what I'm going to do is plunge ahead, and what I'm doing is now I'm going to show you the individual sections, and there's about 5 to 6 sections for the report. And just right now, I'm just very quickly going through them, sort of a preview. The report typically is about 12 pages long, plus then there is what we call the load calendar at the very end of the report, which is very simply 1 page per month showing you how the facility operates, the actual usage. So let me zoom way back to the front and we'll start the tour here. I'm going to drill back in. First thing, the way Energy AI, the way the analysis works is it's a series of basically statistical procedures that looks for patterns. And we look for patterns at different levels. We look for seasonal patterns. We look for weekly patterns. We look for day of week patterns. And then we look for hour of day patterns. And so what we're trying to find is there a typical load profile for a given facility? And in this one, it's a pretty standard one. 5 days a week, weekends largely shut down. This one's a pretty good pattern. We're looking at a actual week, the week of April 21st, 2019. The black is in fact the actual usage. The green is the model that we build. Essentially, the green is the baseline range. And some people are not familiar with the concept. We call it the expected use range. Again, just to avoid some technical jargon. This is for every hour of the day throughout the year based on historical data. This is where the usage for this facility is expected to fall in this range. And this range will rise and fall with weather if there is a weather correlation. And I like to use this as to explain, okay, so what do you need? What does Energy AI need to do its analysis? What we need is a year of interval energy data. And that by interval, we mean it has to be 1 hour or less. So we can take hourly data or 15-minute or 30-minute or 1 minute, whatever you can get, and in whatever format you can get it. We have gotten all kinds of crazy data. Usually, probably about half the time, comes from utilities. So people will download their historic data. Could be green button data, if you're familiar with the green button. A lot of it is not meter data, it may be interval data recorders or sub-meters. But basically, any place you can get interval energy data, we can analyze it. We like to get a full year. We can do the analysis with a minimum of 3 months, but that's, you're not going to get full summer or full winter, or you're not going to get a full both seasons, for example, if you don't have at least 6 months of data. So more is better. And that's it. The way it works is you go onto our website, you upload the data, and we send you this report back, like I said, typically within an hour. So what are we seeing here? As I said, standard weekday through weekend pattern. We categorize hours into on versus off hours. And this is something often surprises people right away. This is, for example, here it says there are 14 on hours. And we show people, we'll see this in just a minute, when does your energy use typically wake up? When does it go back to sleep? And this often surprises them. Typically it'll be, gee, why is it waking up so early, or why is it shutting down so late? It could be thermostat settings, other lighting schedules, whatnot. So here we see there are typically 14 on hours starting at 4 a.m. Now this may not be, again, unusual. We're showing what we're showing here, the savings. We're saying now, if this is too long, if your operations are in fact shorter than this, here's how much you would save if they could be shortened by 1 hour. So we don't know if that's possible or not. Maybe the 14 hours is perfectly reasonable for this facility, but if it's not, this gives you a ballpark of the savings you get if you're able to synchronize your operating schedule, your energy, your equipment schedules with your operations. And then we get into more detail, exactly when does it wake up, 4 a.m. The dark green here is showing you when it tends to rise most steeply. The dark blue, when it tends to drop, your load drops most steeply. Energy AI tries to look for days which behave the same. So here we see Mondays through Fridays. This is a simple example. They tend to behave the same. Saturdays and Sundays tend to behave the same as each other, but different, obviously, from the weekdays. We've seen all kinds of crazy schedules where, well, retail, often retail, they're open on Saturdays, closed on Sundays or whatnot. We have one client who specializes in churches, and I mean large churches in Southern California. And as you would expect, they will have high Sundays, and sometimes they'll sponsor meetings during the week. Community groups or their own groups will have meetings, like on Wednesday nights we'll have meetings, and this will show them what those schedules look like. All right, the next thing we look at is what we call the 24/7 load. And this is a very simple analysis. We're looking at, as I said, we look at which days of the week are the high use days, which are the low use days. We take the low use days and then we look at the hour by hour analysis and we say, what are the low use hours? And it may be, for example, it might be Sundays at 2 a.m. That's typically, for most weeks, that's the hour when the load is as low as it gets. And we make the very simplistic assumption that that is the time when stuff which can be shut off, or which does cycle on and off, is shut off. And again, not always true. There can be, security and other stuff coming on, but it's a reasonable assumption. So let's say it's 2 a.m. on Sunday nights. We will look at all the 2 a.m.s throughout the full year of data that we have, do a simple statistical analysis, and find out where the typical lowest point is, and we'll say, in this case, it's 122 kW. So we'll say that's the demand, typically the lowest demand. And we simply say, now, if you could reduce that by 10%, by hook or by crook, we don't know how you could do that, here's how much you would save. In this example of this facility, that 122 kW running 24/7 makes up 36% of total electricity use. That's actually not a bad number. That's a fairly good number. In office buildings, for example, we often see this number hitting 50%, particularly if if they have a server farm or whatever, computers running 24/7. Healthcare, those of you who work with healthcare facilities, we will see 24/7 load, 60% sometimes, and often not a lot you can do about it. They have to have ventilation running 24/7, but this number often surprises people, unless it's a special facility like those I just described. If this is 60% for a standard office building, then usually there's some easy pickings for savings there. Weather impact. Now, those of you who are metrics users are familiar with the weather regression analysis that is done, for M&V, and we're pretty much following that same methodology. We have a few different tweaks to it in that we do the weather correlation by day of week type. And what we mean by that in this example is we would do separate correlations for weekdays versus weekends. So the church example I gave a few minutes ago, where they have high use on Sundays, lower use on other days of the week. So you might have a facility which its similar days of the week might be Sunday, might be one all by itself. You might have Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays act the same, Saturdays act differently. So we will do the correlation separately for each of those. And we do it on a daily basis. So I know with metrics, typically you're doing it with billing periods. So you're doing it on a monthly basis. We actually will look at each day, average outdoor temperature for that day. And again, by the types of days, so Mondays through Fridays. You do not need to provide weather data whenever you order or upload interval data to us. We ask you for if it's in the US or Canada or a bunch of other countries, we'll ask you for the first 3 digits of the postal code or the zip code. And we use that. We have our own sources of weather data, so we'll go grab the data directly. If you do have weather data, you can provide that, but very few clients do that. So we do the standard regression. I mentioned at the outset that this is not a true M&V analysis in the sense that we don't adhere to some of the same thresholds. So one of the most obvious ones is weather, where typically you want a correlation coefficient of 0.75 or higher to really establish a firm correlation with weather. We actually go with a lower one. We go with 60%. So because what we want to do is take our best guess as to whether the facility is affected, whether energy use is driven by weather. And once we find there is a correlation, we like to express it again in a way that makes some sense for a less technical audience. So those of you who are familiar with the weather regression, you know that the slope is an indication of overall heating or cooling system efficiency. Well, we like to express that in terms of dollars per day, per degree Fahrenheit. So it's basically dollars per degree day. And in this example, the balance point for this is 60 Fahrenheit. So they start cooling when the average outdoor temperature is above 60 degrees. So if a day's average temperature is 70 degrees, then that's going to cost you an additional $290 because we basically take the slope, which is kilowatt hours per degree day, and we convert that to using up prices. I'll talk about where we get our prices in a little bit. But again, trying to ballpark this for the less technical user. So we found this has been a really interesting number for people. So because they know, well, gee, where I am, it's often over 70 degrees. Sometimes we have days that average 75 or 80. This is, again, the daily average, not the maximum temperature, but the daily average temperature. And so they quickly say, well, gee, at $30 a day, hot days are costing me a lot of money. We also do another slightly non-standard, although I guess it's becoming more and more standard now. We also try to look at an hour-by-hour basis how weather affects the usage. And here we use a very low threshold of correlation. We're not trying to, we don't model, we do a regression on each individual hour basis, but we don't use that to establish whether there is a solid regression or not. We look at the whole day. But here we're just trying to see, can we tease out any evidence of a setback? So in this example, the blue shaded hours do show some correlation, meaningful correlation with weather. So it indicates that there is heating or in this example, cooling occurring during these hours. So we're trying to tease out the setback. And often this little graph is solid blue. There's no indication of setback. And this goes into more detail about the balance points. We're using the same variable base degree day methodology that option C on the M&V protocols. Our next section is unusually high use. Basically, after we use the weather adjustment, we use seasonal adjustments, which we'll look at in a minute. All this to normalize, the baseline for a given day of the week and a given hour of the day. And then we say, okay, when is the usage, the actual usage, go over that expected use range or over that baseline range? And that's what we're seeing here. This graph is showing us a full year of hourly data, or I'm sorry, this is actually daily, so it's 365 days, and it's showing us when did the actual usage exceed the expected range, and that's the little bright red here. And you can see, like down here, this is when it happened on weekends, because weekends are lower use, so they're the lower days. And we can see up here 30% of the high use occurred on Saturdays and Sundays. We can also tease out, because we know that our typical hourly profiles, we can look and say, when did it exceed that range? Did it look like something got turned on early? So, it pops up earlier than expected? Or does it look like something didn't get turned off? That the actual usage did not drop off. Let's say it typically drops off at 6 p.m. Well, for a given day, it looks like something got left on and the load did not drop off until 9. So we kind of categorize the unusually high use in that way. So here we're saying, for example, on weekends, we're seeing 30% of the high use occurred when the load rose instead of remaining flat or dropping. So looks like something got left on. We had 866 hours during the period when usage was higher than expected, and this was 3% of total usage. So this actually is not a bad facility. A lot of times we'll see this number approach 10% or more. And that can be a good indication of either a controls issue, people are overriding control systems. Typically, if you see all of a sudden high use on Saturdays and it keeps happening in successive Saturdays, that's an indicator that may be a controls issue. Forgot to point out, although you've probably seen it, we also express savings opportunities, not just in dollars or kilowatt hours, but also in avoided CO2 emissions. Our clients are paying much more attention to that these days, so people want to see that impact of either savings opportunities or, in this case, higher than expected use. I'll talk about where we get that in a minute. This here, I'm still in the same section, the unusually high use. We always like to show a typical week, an actual week that represents whatever this section of the report is analyzing. So this graph here is showing a week with a lot of unusually, unexpectedly high use. So here, Sunday. Now this could be, again, could be perfectly legitimate. This is a manufacturing facility, so maybe they had a Sunday shift come on. And you can see down in the chart below, so this turns out to be Sunday, July 1st, that there was 5,000 kilowatt hours of additional use than would be expected for a Sunday, the green being the expected profile, and that cost about $633 usually using local prices. This can be very helpful for some clients. My favorite example here was a high school we did in Las Vegas a year ago or so. And they had a lot of high use on Saturdays in, I think it was like in March. And it turned out that a particular March, that they hosted a district basketball tournament. And so they had their gym open on Saturdays, and they were surprised at how much that was costing them. And they were not getting compensated for that. So that was something that got their attention in a hurry, was that it was a fairly expensive tournament that they hadn't anticipated. Our consultant who focuses on churches, like I said, churches will often have community groups come in and they'll let them use their facilities free of charge. And they've been able to point out exactly what that usage or what that privilege is costing them. Seasonal load, I briefly touched on. Seasonal load is kind of a catch-all term for us. As I mentioned, we don't ask for, you don't need to provide additional independent variables such as occupancy, or in the case of manufacturing, if you had production information. But clearly that type of stuff can be a driver. So what we're looking for here are long-term trends, and by long-term trends, we usually use a moving average, 5 to 7 week moving average, which do not correlate with weather. And we make the assumption that there is some independent variable which drives that, which again, we don't have the data for. And in this case, we see two of them. One is kind of in the winter, and the other is kind of late spring for the historic data that we have. Now, this may very well be, in fact, weather driven, in the sense that it could be some ad hoc heating load, for example, but it doesn't correlate with weather. So it could be, a simple example would be, space heaters. You bring them in only when you start to get complaints or something. So it's not something it's not thermostatically controlled. So often we will see seasonal load like this, which may be in summer, you'll see peaks. But again, it doesn't correlate well with weather. In this case, it could be production. I don't know what type of facility this was. I think it was a plastics manufacturing, but I'm not sure. Could be they had a busy winter. So we're just simply identifying it, quantifying it, and saying, oh, by the way, if you can reduce this by 10%, here's again the ballpark savings you would get. Shutdowns. This is a interesting section. This came about. This was not in our initial analysis when we started this 8-9 years ago. What we define as a shutdown day is a day when the usage is lower than expected throughout the whole day and it stays relatively flat. So this would typically be holidays or maintenance periods. And as one of our clients put it, this is the dog. This is interesting for they call it the dog that didn't bark. What's often of most value is what does not show up on this this section. So here, for example, we're seeing one shutdown day, which is Monday, December 24th, day before Christmas. However, notice Christmas. Why isn't Christmas a shutdown day? Well, there is a bump there. And again, what we're looking for is a day where the load stays relatively flat and relatively close to the 24/7 level. And in fact, if you look, we'll do this in a few minutes, if you look at other major holidays throughout the year, then in fact, they all look kind of like Christmas. They all are lower than usual. They don't go up to fully up to the expected use range, but there's still something happening. And this again could indicate a controls opportunity. Maybe there's some equipment cycling on and off that does not need to. So this has often been a informative section for people when they say, well, how come I only have one holiday here? Why don't I have more? Energy prices, I've mentioned, we like to, as you've seen, we like to express everything in dollars and cents. You do not have to provide any energy prices. If you don't, which most of our clients do not, again, if we know the zip code, we use the U.S. Energy Information Administrations. They have a publicly available database of average electricity, natural gas prices by state, by different market segments, residential, commercial, industrial. We use the EPA eGrid as our source of emissions factors to convert energy use into CO2 emissions. Weather data we get from the U.S. National Climatic Data Center. Again, with the zip code, we'll pick the nearest weather site. There's, gosh, I think 3,000 in the U.S. We have 10,000 around the world. We do international work. We do a lot of analyses in other countries. And see, I think I'm almost on time here, Tyler. I'll just, again, sum up or show you the last half of the report, the last 12 pages usually, is just simply what we call the load calendar. And we initially did not offer the load calendar because I just thought, well, gee, why have 12 additional pages just showing you graphs? But early users said, no, we want to see that because your report is not picking up everything. So this gives us a quick thumbnail view. The green, again, is the expected use range every day. But they can see things like, well, gee, why is only Christmas Eve a holiday? Why isn't Memorial Day? Well, here's Memorial Day. Memorial Day, sure enough, the usage was lower, but there's still a good bump right through the day. Or what about the 4th of July? 4th of July, still a good bump there. So anyway, the load calendar can be allows you to drill down. We also offer, by the way, you can, in addition to the report, you can get a CSV file of much of the data underlying this for you to use to do your own analyses with. It's a very, very simple file. This whole report, this is our standard service, like I said, $20 report, looks at usually the most recent year of data. And you order this, as often as you wish. I have some clients who will get it, every 6 months. But for Northern California clients, we're using the same calculation engine that we use for this report. But if you have customers, if you have clients who are PG&E customers, PG&E now has a program called Share My Data, which allows a third party like Energy AI to directly grab a customer's meter data directly from PG&E and do an analysis with it. So there's an authorization, a one-time authorization where you say, I give Energy AI permission to grab my data. And what we do is we grab a year of it, and do pretty much the same analysis. But then every day going forward, we continue to get the latest daily data, and we send out alerts. So this is an example of an alert for just a couple days ago. Up here in Northern California, it was quite hot this past week. And so this is an alert that went out to a customer that has 3 facilities they're monitoring. So they did set, and this is for Tuesday, they did set a fairly high peak. You can set thresholds, say, send me an alert if my demand is over 240 kW, the peak for the day. And in this case, it hit 276, so they got this alert. The second facility, wow, they really went high. They have an alert that's showing, and again, maybe just additional air conditioning. This is the first big heat wave of the year. And then they had a third facility, which, got a little bit of a peak. But anyway, so this is something new. It gets rebranded for our clients. So if your client should have your logo here. The alert, by the way, they can drill down to, so they tap on the alert and they can see something like this. They get a more detailed look.
So let me ask you this, and I was actually getting ready to launch a poll, which we've never done a poll before, but you started talking about this in the beginning. And if you're okay with it, I just kind of wanted to get a feel for the type of clients that we have here, but also, I mean, what is your clientele? Where are you selling, or who uses this software or this report most, and who do you think actually gets or could get the most value out of it?
Well, our clients, like I said, 65% are what I loosely call energy services companies, but I use that term very broadly. So it's what I would call a more traditional ESCOs, who are providing energy efficiency services, audit services, and retrofit services. We have a fair number of photo PV system integrators who will use energy AI, basically as a pre-sales tool to show customers this is, what your usage profile looks like, and then they will do their own analysis on top of it, say, and here's, by the way, what our PV system may save you. Gosh, we have all kinds. We have consultants who focus on lighting, and in terms of the facilities, it's just a huge range. We get a lot of the, what you would expect. We do a lot of large energy users, like this manufacturing facility we're looking at here. We recently did every NHL arena in the US and Canada from one consultant who was focusing on NHL stuff for some reason. But what I really like is we also get a lot of smaller facilities. And this is kind of a personal goal for me. Because the price point is so low, we really encourage people to get this for those facilities that normally, you can't afford to instrument or audit. You're not going to, university campus or military base, you're not going to necessarily audit every facility. But if you can get the interval data for them, you can get, at least you can get some visibility. We have a client that has a municipal facilities department that has over 2,000 facilities, and they a very close eye on the largest 100 of those, but they can't look, they can't do the detail on all. So that's who we work with.
We do have a question from Roger. For a building with multiple meters, do you provide the same report for each meter as well as the facility rolled up in total, or is that?
Good point. What we usually recommend is if the meter, if an individual meter has significant load and a specific load, like maybe it's the cooling plant, whatever, we recommend do that individually. Roll up, the report, is basically for a given data set, and typically a meter is a data set. But we will roll up, if you send us data for 10 meters and you say, please also give me a report for the whole thing, we can roll that up. We do charge extra for that, for the roll up. it can be whatever makes sense for that facility, but as a rule, we say the more granular, the better.
I think that's pretty much it. We appreciate you guys showing up, and thank you, Dave, for your presentation. I think it was very insightful, and for those that asked questions, we appreciate it, and we will be sure to connect with you guys next month. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.